Amelia Earhart was declared dead in 5 minutes. Here's the paperwork nobody talks about. January 5, 1939, Los Angeles. Inside a probate courtroom, a judge opens a file. There is no jury, no press conference, no dramatic testimony. Just a folder of papers, a request, and a signature. 5 minutes later, Amelia Earhart is legally dead. Not because anyone found her. Not because anyone found the plane or the wreckage, or a single trace of what happened somewhere over the Pacific. She is declared dead because a piece of paper says the case could not be classified as usual. Here's what almost nobody mentions when they tell this story. Under normal law, a missing person couldn't be declared dead for 7 years. Amelia Earhart had been missing for 18 months. So why did a judge break with 70 years of legal precedent to close her case in less time than it takes to watch this introduction? The answer isn't hiding over the ocean. It's sitting in a filing cabinet. The search ends. The money doesn't. On July 2, 1937, Amelia Earhart and navigator Fred Noonan lifted off from La, New Guinea, bound for a speck of land in the Pacific called Howland Island. They never arrived. The U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca lost radio contact. Within the hour, a search began, and it would grow into one of the largest air and sea search operations in American history to that point. The U.S. Navy and Coast Guard combed more than 150,000 square miles of open ocean. Battleships, aircraft carriers, dozens of planes scanning empty water. And then, roughly 2 weeks in, it stopped. Official government resources were finite, and the ocean is not. By mid-July 1937, the search was called off. As far as the United States government was concerned, the case was closed. George Putnam did not accept that. Putnam, publisher, publicist, and Amelia's husband, began funding private search efforts out of his own pocket. He chartered boats. He financed expeditions to comb nearby islands. This continued for months, stretching all the way to October 1937. Searching the ocean is not cheap. Fuel, crews, chartered vessels, weeks at sea, even in 1937 dollars. This was a significant financial undertaking, and every week that passed without answers meant another set of bills with no guarantee of resolution. What does it mean to keep paying for a search the government has already abandoned? At what point does hope become an unsustainable expense? By October, even Putnam's resources and resolve had limits. The searching stopped. But the questions it left behind, legal, financial, deeply personal, were only just beginning. The 5-minute verdict. Fast forward to January 1939. Superior Court Judge Clarence Elliott Craig sits with a probate request in front of him. A petition, filed on Putnam's behalf, to have Amelia Earhart declared legally dead. Under ordinary law, that required 7 years of absence. Amelia had been gone for 18 months. Judge Craig granted it anyway. According to contemporary newspaper accounts, Craig acknowledged that waiving the standard waiting period was extraordinary, but he reasoned that Amelia Earhart's disappearance simply could not be treated as an ordinary case. He set July 2, 1937, the date she vanished, as her official date of death. The hearing was over in minutes, and in that same brief proceeding, Craig named George Putnam sole executor of her estate. That estate traced back to a will Amelia had written years earlier, on April 1, 1932, in Rye, New York, long before anyone imagined it would ever be needed this soon. It named Putnam as executor and left him her personal property outright. Everything beyond that went into a trust, with the income directed quarterly to her mother, Amy Otis Earhart, living in Medford, Massachusetts. Contemporary press reports place the estate's value at just over $10,000. A modest figure even by 1939 standards, but one that, adjusted for inflation, represents a meaningfully larger sum in today's terms. None of this required a body. None of it required proof. It required paperwork, a will drafted 7 years earlier, a legal petition, and a judge willing to say that some cases simply can't wait for the calendar to catch up. So, did that ruling end the story? Or did it just quietly start a new one written entirely in probate filings instead of headlines? Less than 5 months after that courtroom ruling, on May 21, 1939, George Putnam remarried. His new wife was Jean-Marie Cosini James, a fellow author. The ceremony took place in Boulder City, Nevada. It was Putnam's third marriage. Is that timeline uncomfortable to sit with? For a lot of people watching this, probably. But it's worth resisting the urge to turn a data point into a verdict. We don't have access to what Putnam was thinking, what grief looked like for him, or what those 18 months had actually been like behind closed doors. What we have is a sequence of dates, and a modern audience left to reconcile them however they choose. Now contrast that with the other name that vanished on July 2nd, 1937, navigator Fred Noonan. Noonan had married Mary Beatrice Martinelli just months before the flight, in March 1937, in Yuma, Arizona. When he disappeared, she was left, like Putnam, waiting for news that never fully came. But history did not treat their stories equally. Amelia Earhart's disappearance generated global headlines, government search fleets, and 8 decades of books and documentaries. Fred Noonan's name barely made it into the same sentence as hers in most retellings, despite the fact that he was, by any measure, one of the most accomplished aerial navigators of his era, a man who had helped chart Pan American's commercial routes across the entire Pacific. To this day, there has still never been a full-length biography written about him. One disappearance became a legend, the other became a footnote. Same ocean, same flight, same silence, wildly different afterlives. Here's where the story quietly relocates from courtroom to campus. Purdue University, which had helped fund Earhart's Lockheed Electra in the first place, became the eventual home of an enormous archival collection. Thousands of letters, telegrams, receipts, blueprints, financial records, and search-related documents. Fred Noonan's own correspondence with his wife Mary Beatrice, letters sent home during the very flight that took his life, are preserved there as well, alongside photographs and newspaper clippings documenting both families' agonizing wait for news. Before Amelia Earhart became a legend, in other words, she became paperwork. Wills, petitions, trust documents, correspondence, invoices for search vessels that never found anything. It's a strange kind of afterlife, a life preserved not in a body that was never recovered, but in the physical residue of bureaucracy. Signatures, stamps, filing numbers, dates typed on onion skin paper. The documents didn't solve the mystery. They didn't need to. They simply made sure that even without an ending, there was still a record. The greatest mystery of Amelia Earhart's story isn't only what happened somewhere over the Pacific on July 2nd, 1937. It's also what happened nearly 18 months later in a Los Angeles courtroom in under 5 minutes, where a will written years earlier, a waived legal waiting period, and a single judge's signature quietly closed one of the most famous open cases in American history. While the public spent decades chasing theories about islands, spies, and crash sites, another version of the story was being written in triplicate, in probate filings, trust documents, and estate paperwork that most people have simply never read. Sometimes, when no body is ever found, the paperwork becomes the final chapter. But Amelia Earhart's story isn't the only one buried in that filing cabinet. There's another name on that flight, one that vanished the same day, in the same plane, over the same ocean, and almost nobody has ever told his story properly. Next time, the forgotten life and disappearance of Fred Noonan.